Today on Ask BRS TV Investigates, we find out how many gallons of salt water your salt mix actually makes, and then use that data to determine the total cost per gallon and what that cost looks like to the average reefer. Hi, I'm Randy, the host for a popular YouTube series, BRS TV Investigates, where we take popular reefing theories, methods, questions, and products and dive even further than what the manuals and packaging will tell you in order to put them to the test in a real-world environment, rate them on our scale of reef fantasy to reef certainty, and then share with you, the reefing community, what we find. So today we're looking to answer two questions. First, are the amount of gallons listed on the salt mixes realistic when mixed to a commonly used salinity of 35 parts per thousand or 1.026 specific gravity? And then second, how much per gallon is each salt? And what is the monthly cost for a common tank size around 100 gallons, getting 4 10% water changes each month? Okay, so with today's testing, I don't expect to determine if one salt mix is better than any other, because I honestly don't think that there's an answer that truly exists, since each reefer's goals and personal preferences are relative to themselves and their own tanks. However, what I can expect based on the data that we see here today is that since some of the salt mixes are relatively clear how many gallons they will make, while others are not so clear, today we walk away with some clearer and more realistic expectations for how many gallons each will make from a more common and useful standpoint. Along with that, we can really get a better idea of how this relates to our individual reefing budgets and maybe even reconsider some salt mixes that we haven't thought of using before. We plan to conduct this test by first starting with a fresh bucket or bag of the most popular salt brands, being the standard Instant Ocean and Instant Ocean Reef Crystals, Red Sea Coral Pro and Red Sea Salt in the blue bucket, the HW Reefer Salt, Brightwell's Neo Marine, and two of the Tropic Marin salts, the Pro and the Classic. We'll choose a target salinity that 95% or more of reefers use for their tanks, including us here at BRS, which is 35 parts per thousand or 1.026 specific gravity, and conduct the test in 5-gallon buckets that are equally measured with 5 gallons of RODI water and stored at room temperature. To calculate how much each bag or bucket will make, we'll weigh how much salt it takes to reach our target salinity, then weigh the remainder to get the total gallons each will yield. To determine the cost per gallon for the salt mixes, we'll use their current price and divide that into how many gallons each salt mix makes, which I think it's important for me to note here that some of these salts do go on sale from time to time, but in perspective, a change in $5 up or down really only works out to an overall change of about 3 cents or so per gallon, so keep that in mind. And then with all that data combined, we'll share the average monthly cost that price works out being for a fairly average tank size at 100 gallons that gets 10% water changes 4 times each month for a total of 40 gallons changed. Another thing worth mentioning, Brightwell's really the only salt mix we'll test that directly states how many total gallons of salt water can be made at a very specific salinity, while the others have label ranges from 160 to 200 gallons, but don't explicitly compare those volumes to any target salinity. Let's get into the results, starting with the lowest upfront cost salt brand and then working our way to the highest. The first salts that we tested were the two from Instant Ocean, which I personally started using when I first got into the hobby because of their low cost and also because of how many good looking tanks I encountered that were also using them. The lowest cost option of the bunch we tested was the Instant Ocean Sea Salt at $54.99, which states that it can make up to 160 gallons. However, for the purposes of this test and using 35 parts per thousand as a common reference point, we found that it took approximately 801 grams to create 5 gallons of salt water. So with a total weight of 22,345.5 grams, the entire bucket has the potential to make 139.5 gallons of salt water, which is about 20 gallons less than what the front of the bucket says. Looking at the cost per gallon for the standard Instant Ocean at its current price of $54.99, if you divide that by the total amount of gallons you can make, you end up with a total cost per gallon being about 39 cents, which on a 100-gallon tank being changed 4 times each month at a total of 40 gallons, the monthly cost works out to be about $15.60. The more popular of the two Instant Ocean salts is Reef Crystals at $62.99, likely because of its stated extra calcium and element levels, which ended up being very close to the standard IO salt, needing 804 grams to make 5 gallons of salt water. And at a total of 20,228.5 grams in the bucket, you get an average capacity of 125.8 gallons, so approximately 34 gallons less than the 160 on the label. The Reef Crystals cost is slightly higher at $62.99, bringing the total cost per gallon to 50 cents, so just 11 cents more than the standard Instant Ocean. To run the same 100-gallon tank each month using Reef Crystals, you'd be looking at a difference of around $4.40 per month at $20 total. The third lowest cost option, coming in at $69.99 per box, was the HW Reefer Salt Mix, which is one of the oldest time-tested German salt mix brands out there, who uses a fully synthetic mix from end to end and is the second most popular salt on our site and what we used exclusively here at BRS for many years and also during the initial setup of the BRS 160. On the box of the HW Reefer, it states that the 20-kilogram box is for approximately 600 liters of water, which works out to be right about 159 gallons. Looking at the results for our testing, it took 755 grams of HW salt to make 5 gallons and had a total weight of 19,524 grams, leaving us with an approximate total gallon capacity from a single box at 129.3 gallons. HW Reefer is currently priced at $69.99, so at a little over 129 gallons, that works out to be about 54 cents per gallon or $21.60 per month on our 100-gallon tank. Our most popular salt mixes are both the Red Sea Coral Pro and Red Sea Salt Blue Bucket, which are both priced at $72.99 and are more natural sea salt mixes that use salts directly sourced from the Red Sea. The Coral Pro is widely used by reefers who aim for both elevated levels of alkalinity and calcium and has probably become one of the more popular salts for reefers who have tanks that consume both but are using only water changes alone to supplement for them. We found that although both buckets show a capacity to make 175 gallons each, that isn't directly tied to any specific salinity. However, the back of each bucket does give some pretty easy to follow and direct guidance as to target salinities for things like fish-only systems, coral systems, SPS systems, and more. Surprisingly, both buckets of Red Sea salts tested almost identically, with the blue bucket needing 746.5 grams to make 5 gallons at 35 parts per thousand, while the Coral Pro needed 739.5 grams. The total weight of each bucket was within 100 grams of each other, with the blue bucket weighing 22,276.5 grams and the Coral Pro at 22,178 grams. At these weights, it puts the total gallon capacity at this salinity to 149.2 gallons and 149.9 gallons respectively. As for the cost per gallon, both Red Sea salts are priced equally the same at $72.99 each, meaning that both will run 49 cents per gallon, and for a month-long maintenance on our 100-gallon example tank, each would be around $19.60 per month. Up next is the salt mix that WWC trusts using on the reef systems throughout their facility, which is Brightwell's Neomarine and currently priced at $73.99. As I mentioned earlier, Neomarine was the only salt mix of the bunch that specifically stated how many gallons it will make at a known target salinity, which the bucket reads 150 gallons of salt water at a specific gravity of 1.025. After testing ourselves, we found that it took right about 684 grams to mix up a 5-gallon bucket to 1.026, for the total weight of the bucket being 20,533 grams. Surprisingly, in the end, it worked out to be almost exactly 150 gallons, with 150.1 gallons made total. At Neomarine's current cost of $73.99, the total cost per gallon also ends up coming in at the same as the Red Sea salts of 49 cents per gallon, which means the average monthly cost on a 100-gallon tank is also the same at $19.60. The last two salts we tested were the Tropic Marin Classic at $83.72 and Tropic Marin Pro at $95.37, which are one of the only salts on the market that use pharmaceutical-grade ingredients, making them some of the purest and cleanest salts available. Since our own internal testing on BRS pharma-grade additives for alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and kalkwasser compared to other bulk and industrial-grade options, we've since switched all of the BRS tanks to the Tropic Marin Pro because of the quality of source materials they use. Because these are salts that we use internally here, I was specifically interested in how the Tropic Marin pair would measure out volume-wise, as they both state a range of being able to yield 165 to 200 gallons of salt water, which is roughly the exact size of a couple of our large mixing reservoirs. So taking a look at the data that we collected for the Tropic Marin Classic salt first, we see that it took about 734 grams to mix into 5 gallons and had a total weight of 25,056.5 grams. This calculated out to yield around 170.7 gallons, which is within the ranges of the label and was one of the highest total volumes. So with that in mind, at its current price of $83.72, the total cost per gallon was surprisingly the same as the Red Sea Salts and Brightwell's Neomarine at 49 cents per gallon or $19.60 per month on a 100-gallon tank. The last salt we tested was the Tropic Marin Pro, which we use in all of our storage tanks and for the BRS WWC 750XXL, BRS 160, and office tanks. The Pro worked out to 722 grams to make up 5 gallons of 35 parts per thousand salt water and had the most weight of all of the mixes at 25,094.5 grams. This also ended up being the highest total volume gallons of all the salts, coming in at about 173.8 gallons of total yield. The Tropic Marin Pro does have the higher price at $95.37. However, when calculated by cost per gallon, which ends up being about 55 cents per gallon, it only comes out 1 cent higher than the HW Reefer and 5 cents higher than the Instant Ocean Reef Crystals. Meaning that for $22 a month, you could change out 10% of our 100-gallon tank every week. Okay, so to answer the first question of are the amount of gallons listed on the salt mixes realistic when mixed to a common salinity, I'm going to have to give this one a 3 on the scale of Reef Fantasy, since Brightwell was the only one to list clear mixing yields at a salinity closest to what the vast majority of reefers will actually use, but also did so using the least amount of salt per gram to get there. This is likely due to the anhydrous salt that they use, which contains less water weight. Along with that, although we didn't hit the 200-gallon mark on the Tropic Marin salts, we did end up with 170 plus gallons from each bucket, which is over 40 extra gallons than the rest of the salts tested today, and is also within the ranges listed on the bucket using the same most commonly used salinity. Answering the second part of today's question of how much per gallon is each salt and what is the monthly cost for a common tank size around 100 gallons, looking at the chart, the largest difference between them works out to be only 16 cents per gallon and is about $6.40 per month, which may be different from reefer to reefer, but you can use today's info to help you figure out the amount for your tank, taking into account that this data doesn't account for any changes for buffering, alkalinity, or calcium that you may choose to make if needed. As I mentioned earlier, cost on these salt brands can really be a moving target, which can probably swing the total cost per gallons up or down by about 3 cents or so. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that after seeing the cost per gallon breakdown or cost per month on a real-world tank, if I wanted to try out a different salt for my tank, I wouldn't feel tied to any one salt in particular. The difference of about plus or minus $6 per month to change salt is probably low enough for most reefers to explore a variety of other options that best fits their needs. It just wouldn't be BRS TV Investigates if we didn't dive in deeper to common salt mix related questions. So the next version of this test that we'll do on the same 8 most common salts will be to test how stable the parameters each one will be after mixing from the initial first few hours to even longer term storage of upwards of a week or more. Finally, head on over to our Reef to Reef post and vote on the poll that asks, how heavily does salt cost weigh on your salt mix choice? And if you have any salt related questions that you'd like to see us test, or just a question about salt mixes in general, drop a comment below, or better yet, jump on our hashtag AskBRSTV Facebook group where the BRS crew, including Ryan and I, get in there and answer your questions. We'll see you on the next BRS TV Investigates.